Carter from the Delaware T Squared Center. We're like to say that we're the geographically smallest center in the region, but I like to think that we've got the other centers by weight. I do my part in that. So we're really happy to have Sam Gregory with us this morning. Mr. Gregory has 40 plus years working in the transportation community for various public and private employers. Since 2012, he's been an independent contractor providing training and technical assistance for public work agencies, providing guidance in pavement management and maintenance best practices for select government organizations. Previous to that, Sam spent 29 years with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, working from the bottom up in field operations with experience in project planning, quality assurance, and training, culminating in the management of a 2-county maintenance organization. So there's a lot of experience that'll be brought to bear. And Sam, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everybody. As you can see by the slide, today's presentation, we're going to be talking about asphalt pavement preservation. Basically, the subtitle, Achieving Quality Through Proper Planning and Monitoring of the Work in Progress. The background on this course, we put it together for Pennsylvania. Myself and several other of the LTAP individuals were going out on field tech assists dealing with pavement preventive maintenance, and we were encountering premature distress. And when I say premature, within the first year of the project. And we talked about what we thought could be happening. And in a lot of cases on these projects, you can have 10 critical items, do 9 correctly, but if you don't do that 10th one, it's going to shorten the longevity of the project. So as you can see on the slide, we're talking about paying attention to detail and monitoring the critical elements. And I see a lot on communication to make sure the people that own the asset, people that are doing the work, anyone else involved, communicates with everyone to make sure we're getting the quality we want. Obviously, you need to have correct materials and equipment, and you have to follow the industry standard operational techniques. What you see in the upper right-hand corner is some seal coat aggregate, and in Pennsylvania, it's supposed to be 1% passing the 200 sieve, which means it's supposed to be clean, like the aggregate to the left of it. And that's just one example of aggregate that I encountered on a tech assist, that looking at it, I asked why they didn't question the cleanliness of it. And the owners of the pavements are in the municipalities in Pennsylvania are a little reluctant to question things, but it's their money that's being used out there. The other thing we do on the tech assist, we try to get a handle on how the operation proceeded, and we ask a lot of questions on the owners of the operational techniques. And quite honestly, they usually don't have an answer, and they're a little, like I said earlier, a little afraid to ask questions simply because they haven't been instructed on the critical elements and what they should be looking for out there. So we talked about in Pennsylvania, we talked about should we be providing an inspection course? And quite honestly, I wasn't in favor of that for a variety of reasons. One, the municipal people, it doesn't lend well in Pennsylvania to their job functions. They have administrative duties, they have operational duties, etc. So we lean towards an oversight where we're not asking them to test material, or not asking them to sample material. We're asking them to pay attention to detail. Now, we have 3 poll questions, which will help generate some discussion, and will help give me some information on how other people handle this situation out there when the work is being performed. So you can see on your screen the 3 poll questions. We'll do all 3 at once. The first one is, do you use inspection forces on seal coat projects? 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 for sometimes. So if you would take a minute and answer that.
Okay, we got votes coming in. We're about 30% have voted. We're going to keep it open for maybe another 20 seconds here. And then Sam, the second question, since everybody's voting here at the same time on all the questions, is do you use inspection forces on asphalt paving overlay? Yes, no, or sometimes? And then the third polling question, which at least Sam will address later in the presentation, is do you require a density measurement gauge be used on asphalt paving overlay projects? So we're about 60% have voted. Let's keep it open for maybe another 10 seconds. Okay, I think we've maximum. So I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results here, which everybody should see on their screen.
Okay, what I'm seeing is obviously there's more inspection forces on the asphalt paving projects than there is on the seal coat. Matthew, I can't see the answers to number 3 on my screen.
Okay, what you're seeing, if maybe you could scroll down, but I'll read it out for you. That the way it's split was 38% said yes. Do they require a density measurement gauge? 41% said no, and 21% sometimes.
Okay, that's good. The first two pretty well mirror Pennsylvania. Inspection forces are used more often on asphalt paving than they are on seal coat. The use of the gauges probably a little bit higher than we do in Pennsylvania, and that's one of the things I want to talk about when we get to the asphalt paving overlay section of the preventive maintenance. So let's continue on with the slideshow. And I'm locked up, Matthew, for some reason.
Okay.
Let me.
All right, you're back. Are you seeing the poll still on your screen?
I took the polls off the screen.
Okay.
But
and should go back to your. You can close that poll. You can exit out.
I did that.
Okay, and then back to either you were using your arrow keys to move forward or an icon on the bottom of the screen.
That's what I'm trying to do. Let me try something here. Sorry about that, folks. I'm not a technical expert.
Is the toolbar on your screen on the bottom, is it obscuring your advanced button?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do.
Why don't you, we could
there
also
we
do
go.
a stop share.
Got it.
There we go. All right.
Like I said, my normal statement, people in Pennsylvania are getting tired of me saying this. I'm just getting used to indoor plumbing, so this technology confuses me a little bit. Having said that, the quality starts with the planning end of it, and that's where your communication also starts. And what we're looking at is you want to do a project level analysis of your roadway conditions and have everyone involved in it, your decision makers, your supervisors, your roadmasters, your public works director, PennDOT individuals in Pennsylvania help out the local municipalities. And you're going to hear me say this several times. You've probably heard it before. The right treatment for the right road at the right time. What are you trying to correct out there? I get a lot of questions on should we do X versus Y? Well, it just depends on what distress you're trying to correct and quite often how much money you want to spend. There are alternatives like the last bullet point. Do you do a seal coat? Expecting maybe 5 years out of it, or do you micro and a little bit more out of it? And of course, everything's based on your pavement conditions and your traffic conditions, etc. First priority, and I have been working in public administration, public works for a long time, is to examine what's going on in your existing pavement. You want to know the type and extent of the project. And that may sound a little strange, but I've encountered projects where they just assumed the road was 18-foot wide. When the contractor got out there, they realized it was 20-foot wide. Now that's going to take more material and it's going to take more money. So again, we're talking about paying attention to detail, and we're also talking about making sure the required prep work is done. In the picture, this picture is used in various programs. You can see there's fatigue cracking, there's some pothole patching that needs repaired, utility patching, longitudinal cracking. If you're going to pave that, you got to worry about the curb reveal. So you need to do a detailed analysis to identify your prep work out there. And you have prep work that's required by what you see, but you also have prep work that's required by your state specifications. For example, on a paving job, you have to tack it. So you want to make sure you're familiar with all the prep work. You need to tack it. You need to paint that curb line on a paving job. Obviously, temperatures, seasonal criteria, clean and dry pavement, etc. So you're looking at both what you see when you do the field view and what you see in the specifications. Again, this may sound a little simplistic, but you need to determine who will complete the work. I've run into projects where the owner thought the contractor was going to do the prep work, and the contractor thought the owner was going to do the prep work with his in-force crews. The bottom line is that's a discussion item for pre-bid and pre-construction conferences with everyone. I learned a long time ago you can cover up a lot of that distress you see there, but it'll come back to haunt you in the long run. So you also need to pay attention to the planning documents. Again, paying attention to detail. You need to reference the correct specifications if you're bidding the job based on a state specification. Certainly, traffic control plays a big part in all these pavement preventive maintenance techniques. Any pre-bid requirements? Do you want them to field view the job? Any warranty language, any other special provisions that might be in there? You need to make sure you have all your documents prepared to ensure that you're going to get the quality you expect. And you need to review those with the people that are going to be performing the work. Like I said, any special provisions. A lot of the projects require a design be submitted anywhere from 5 days to 2 weeks before the project starts. And especially on the seal coat projects, I very seldom see a design, and that's one of the critical elements to make sure the proper oil and aggregate application rates are used out there. The big one in Pennsylvania, which goes to the warranty, is the contractor's responsible for defects that occur within 1 year of the application. When I go out and do a tech assist, I'm looking to help the local government people out. And is there any way that if the project was supposed to last 5 years, 7 years, and it's already exhibiting distress in the first year, is there any way we can get the contractor to come back and repair it? If that is in the special provisions, that gives me some leverage to work with the contractor if we can determine that something happened that he should be responsible for. And these are all items that need to be discussed prior to the project starting. Quite often on a seal coat, we want 3 samples of the oil that's being used. We want 3 samples of the aggregate being used. And to be quite honest about it, that isn't being done in all cases. And keep in mind, when I'm talking about these, hardly anyone calls me up and says, hey, come on out and we're going to show you a job that we got excellent results. We get an awful lot of good quality work in Pennsylvania. But as I age, I'm looking forward to not working part-time anymore in retirement and cutting down on the tech assist. So hopefully by enlightening the people that are paying for the projects, that'll cut down. And this is just a statement that I firmly believe in. Proper planning can make the difference between a great job and a mediocre job. Again, the right treatment for the right road at the right time. Prep work is absolutely necessary. So you have a sound foundation, and all the distress that is existing out there is taken care of. Detailed document preparation, so everybody's on the same page. The contractor knows what you're expecting out there. He knows what specifications, what special provisions that you want him to adhere to. And the assignment of responsibilities. And again, some of that falls through the cracks. Who's going to sweep the road, et cetera. All these things need to be discussed and communicated. Now, when I do the course in Pennsylvania, I spend a lot more time on state specifications simply because a lot of our local government individuals are not that familiar with the PennDOT specifications. They don't really know how to use them. And be honest about it, these state specifications are very voluminous. Actually, in Pennsylvania, for local governments, they have two choices of specifications. The one on the left is the PennDOT construction specs. The one on the right is for lower volume local roads, and they are similar, but they're not identical. So the first thing you have to do is decide which specification fits your situation out there. Then where do you find the critical items in the specifications, and how do I pull out what I should have with me to go out and do an observation when the job is taking place. Communication, I started in 1976, and one of the biggest problems I noticed back then was lack of communication. And to be quite honest about it, it still is a major problem. The specifications need to be discussed pre-bid or pre-job conference, and ask them how they're going to achieve compliance. The one poll question talked about using density gauges out on a paving project. Obviously, if you don't get proper compaction, your job's not going to last as long as you want it to. So if you're not using a density gauge, how is a contractor going to ensure he's achieved compaction? We'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into the paving end of it. And discuss the what if situations. One of the things I've done in the past is I've done field certification, bituminous field certification for the Northeast Center and Excellence in Pavement Technology with DOT people, consultants, contractors people, etc. The specification for asphalt paving. No paving if surfaces are wet. No placement if surfaces are wet. How wet's wet? Depends on which hat you're wearing. If it's puddled, obviously it's wet. If a shower goes through and it's damp, are you going to shut the job down when I got 12 trucks loaded with asphalt? These are the things you want to discuss prior to the operation, so you're not out there trying to figure out what you're going to do and what you're going to allow and not allow when the operation is taking place. So again, communication, the key to getting a quality job. Now, I said we did not want to go in and try to teach the local government and individuals how to do inspection. And obviously, if they feel that they need inspection out there, there are consultant inspectors they can hire, etc. What we wanted to do is give them the information so when they're out there looking at the job, they can ask the right questions. And if they see something that may concern them, they ask it up front and not wait till the project's over and all of a sudden realize that we could have corrected something earlier on in the project. We give them various resources. On the left is the LTAP tech sheet on seal coats. We're going to start out with seal coats, then work into the other pavement preventive maintenance techniques, and obviously specifications. And on the right is an FHWA tip sheet that we provide them for their use, so they feel a little bit more comfortable when they're out there and they can ask the right questions. I'm going to digress just a little bit. The reason we picked Seal Coat, Micro, Ultra Thin Bond, and Wearing Course, which you may know as Nova Chip, and Asphalt Paving 1.5-inch overlays, these are the operations that are generating the majority of tech assists that we have to go out and try to analyze why there's premature distress. So the first one, as you see, is going to be Seal Coat. We're trying to get the people, whether it be the roadmaster, a superintendent, public works director, or maybe it's an elected supervisor. In our rural areas in Pennsylvania, you may have 3 elected supervisors, one of which is probably in charge of the road projects. And we're trying to get them out of the office, at least for a little bit. And when the job starts, and periodically, so they can see what's going on out there and they can feel more comfortable asking questions. You're going to see the first bullet point in just about all the techniques, the operations. Road needs to be clean and dry. And when you're working with asphalt, you need to make sure you get proper adherence. So it has to be clean, it has to be dry. With the Seal Coat, we don't want any streaking of the oil. If the job looks like after the oil distributor applies the oil, somebody dragged their fingers down through it, that's streaking. That's not going to work. And obviously we're using an emulsion in Pennsylvania. We want the aggregate applied before the oil changes from brown to black. If it's wait too long, then obviously you're going to lose your cover aggregate. We want the rollers following behind the spreader. There has been a change to that specification and the rolling techniques I'll talk about in a little bit. But we also want to make sure that, number one, we have a design, and that someone, whether it be the local people or someone on the contractor's crew, does a quick yield test to make sure that their application is within a design rate tolerance. And you can see in the picture, they're doing a quick yield on the aggregate spreader, figuring out pounds per square yard. And we also want them to make sure that we call it proper aggregate embedment, that the oil rises up to about 60 to 70% the height of the aggregate. And then when it sets, that will be enough to hold that aggregate in place, and we won't have a lot of whip off. And that's what you're seeing there. Now, one of the problems I have with the Seal Coat work that goes on is, like I said, I'm not seeing a lot of designs. I was out on one tech assist where one of the pavements was a very old oxidized ID2 wearing course off the Marshall mix design. One was a super pave that was starting to oxidize. One was a flexible base with a series of 9.5 super pave patches. All 3 of those are going to require a different rate of application for the oil to hold the aggregate in. So that's why we need to design, and we need to talk about that up front so the contractor can communicate to his distributor operator that the design is a guideline, but if you encounter a odd situation out there, to field adjust so we don't lose the cover aggregate. The aggregate you see in that bottom photograph, I question whether it met specification. They did not have samples. They did not have any certifications. But if you look at that, if you look at the flat elongated pieces in the left portion of that photograph, that's not what we want. But if you apply the oil at a rate that's going to hold the 2 aggregate pieces on the right, you're going to flood those elongated pieces and you're going to have bleeding. If you put enough down to hold the elongated pieces, but not so much that it's going to bleed, you're not going to have enough to hold the rest of the aggregate down. So visually, you can look at that when the operation starts out and try to determine. And if you have a question, talk to the contractor about it. No bleeding, obviously. Sweeping operation doesn't dislodge the chips. And what we like to look for in Pennsylvania is that salt and pepper appearance. Quite often, I can't see any black specks down through there. I'm not sure why. I've spoken with the conferences where the contractors were there, why they were over applying the aggregate, because that's money out of their pocket. But from a quality standpoint, if you over apply the aggregate, traffic could grind it down into the aggregate that is adhered to the roadway and dislodge it. So we like to see a salt and pepper appearance as a finished project. Now, kind of summarize what we're talking about here. Communicate, review the critical items from start to finish. Get out of the office. One of the things that drove me crazy when I ran that 2-county operation was I was behind a desk. I'm not an office person. I feel more comfortable out in the field. So I looked for every opportunity I could to get out and see what was happening in the field. And I said earlier, don't wait for the project to continue. If you have a question, maybe there's nothing wrong with it, but communicate your concerns before they become a major problem and have an adverse effect on the overall project. Now, the other thing we do in this course when we provide it for Pennsylvania, we give them a bunch of visuals. Again, one of the things we want them to do is go out there and observe what's going on so they're more familiar with it. And we'll show them this. I know I asked what they see out there, but for this presentation, I'll answer it for you. A pretty good candidate for a seal coat. It's oxidized, as you can see, the larger cracks have been, so it looks like the right treatment for the right pavement at the right time. Seal coat should hold that for hopefully at least 5 years or more before you have to do any maintenance to it. On the other hand, here's a job that's a seal coat in progress. And I tend to be sarcastic at times. And when I'm doing this in person, I'll ask the audience if you can seal coat over potholes. And quite honestly, the answer is, yeah, you can. You don't want to, you shouldn't, because you still got a pothole. But that's an example where obviously it was poor prep of the existing pavement. You're just wasting your money on that. An example where we had excess bleeding. I attributed this to those flat elongated pieces that were used for the aggregate. Actually, it wasn't really a loss of cover aggregate, which you would expect with a bleeding problem. It was just that the flat pieces were covered up, the oil flushed up to the top. This is an interesting photograph, and I've run into this several times. What you're seeing is an existing roadway where they have put a fresh asphalt wedge on the right-hand edge of that pavement. And they come along, distributor guy has his orders, he used to shoot that, and I'm just making up numbers. I'm gonna say he used to shoot it at 0.35 gallons per square yard. That will work on the existing pavement. But as you see in the slide, what happens to that wedge? The oil goes right down through it. So at the end of the day, the aggregate holds on the existing pavement, and anything that was tried on that wedge, there was not enough oil left up on top. The aggregate ends up in the shoulder area.
Sam, can I interrupt you for a second?
You sure can.
Sure. We had a question in the chat box. I wanted to get to it since it came in. Question was, how does the seal coating hold up with snowplow use?
Well, it depends. If it's done correctly and your road isn't way out of profile, it holds up well. Now, what I encourage the people doing winter maintenance is to run plow shoes on their plows so they're not dropping the blade directly onto the pavement and dislodging the aggregate. Like I said, I've been doing this since the 70s. We had major problems back in the 70s. Since our roads have been leveled out, we don't have a excess crown in the center line. That's normally where the plows would take the aggregate off. It's holding up very well as of late. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Sam, we've got about another less than 30 minutes.
Okay, continuing on. Uniform application of oil, no streaking, the chipper in close proximity to the distributor, that's what we want. And you can barely see the roller behind the chipper. So we end up with a finished project like this. This is what we want to see. All right. Going through this is microsurfacing. In Pennsylvania, there's 3 different types. A, B, depending on the rate of application, obviously, which is going to give you the thickness based on the different size of the aggregate. The third type is a rut fill. And quite honestly, they will do that, maybe do the rut fill and then come back and do a type A or B over that. This is right out of the specifications. You're going to see that table again. Pavement temperature, 50 degree and rising. Again, we're using an emulsion. Prep work, as we discussed earlier, covering the utilities. Visually, what we want to see is nice, even straight lines. We don't want to see any drag marks in it. We don't want to see any tar balls. Again, when it turns from brown to black, it's set up. And the specs call it to set up within an hour. If it doesn't, you may have to remove and replace it. Neat seam, no bumps or ridges, an overlap of less than 4 inches. That sounds easy to do. Sometimes the bid jobs were bid based on material placed, and some of the contractors overlapped instead of 4 inches, 4 feet, and they ended up getting more money out of the job because they used more material and they wanted the material paid for. So we encourage they pay by the square yard when they bid it and keep that overlap down to less than 4 inches. The key to help me on the Tech Assist, the specs also call for a daily run sheet for micro. And what you do is you add up all the material used, you convert it from tons to pounds, and then you figure out what the application rate is. Then you go to the chart, and in this case, the application rate would match type A for a single app. But if you spec a type B, it would not be enough material use. So we try to teach the participants how to use those run sheets and make sure they're getting what they bid, what they paid for. We require a test strip to be done the first day. Unfortunately, this was done probably back in the early 90s. They didn't do a test strip. They had a problem with the design, and you can see the end result. So we try to get them again out in the field to look at it, and don't be afraid to ask the questions if something doesn't look right out there. If the mix doesn't look right, if the handwork isn't of quality, ask the questions. Visually again, the water sprayed on the roadway ahead of placing the material. That helps the emulsion set correctly. This is just to show them the difference between the cured, which is the black, and the uncured, which is the brown to the right hand side. Got a little bit of ridge at a center line joint. People get excited about that at a center line joint. Obviously, you don't want too high of a ridge. You certainly wouldn't want snowplows taking that off. Back to the question we had on the seal coat. A lot of times it's aesthetics that it may look ugly, but from a quality standpoint, it isn't hurting anything. But if you feel it's not meeting specifications, talk to the contractor before he gets too far. Have them do a better job on the handwork. A surface patch, we talked about prep work. All these preventive maintenance techniques, you have to do the prep work, excuse me. Here's the micro going down over that patch. Here are the guys using the squeegees to get those nice smooth lines we talked about. The squeegee guys can give you a good quality job and give you a good looking aesthetic job. And this is a road, one of the things I get involved with Tech Assist. People will ask me to come down and ride their roads that they're gonna set out for projects. And quite honestly, this road, if you look far enough to the top, you can see Maryland. This butted up against Maryland. and it was in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. And they had a lot of people moving out of Maryland, I guess, to go down and work in Hagerstown. And they weren't familiar with seal coat. So I felt we could maintain this roadway for 5 years or so with a seal coat. The elected supervisor said he gets too many complaints on seal coat work. So instead of that, we did a microsurfacing. This picture was taken 1 year after the micro was put down. Other than a little bit of a ridge on the lane to the right, it doesn't look like a bad job to me. They were happy with it, and the citizens were happy with it. They weren't riding over a seal coat job. Okay, continuing on, ultra thin bonded wearing course. This is Nova Chip for those of you that are familiar with Nova Chip. And again, it's 3 different types, A, B, and C, depending on the nominal maximum aggregate size. And obviously that will gear you towards how much your application rate is going to be for the different types. Same type of prep work, clean and dry. The thermoplastic line paint being removed, sometimes we get in discussions with the contractors over that. And what I tell the locals, if the contractors feel that they can do it without removing it, just make sure they're responsible. If it fails in that area, they're going to come back and repair it. So again, that is a discussion you want to have up front with them. This, as opposed to the micro, this is more like a thin paving job where you apply that emulsion membrane, then you put the ultra thin plant mix wearing course over it. You can see the temperature ranges there. One of the things they can check when we're out in the field is making sure the compaction is completed by 185. Seasonal time frame. I don't see this a lot. I work mostly in the western part of the state. The guys in the eastern part of the state see most of this. The last one that I was called out on and had a problem with basically was due that they did it, I believe, in October. It was very cold and the emulsion in the membrane didn't adhere to the existing pavement. Visuals of it. We're showing here that you need to prepare the cracks. I've had questions asked of me. We did an ultra thin wearing course and the cracks reflected back up within a year. Did you seal the inch wide cracks prior to doing it? No, we didn't. Well, it's a thin membrane, folks. So I would expect that crack to reflect back up through that. Good looking matte texture here. That looks pretty good to me. That's what you want to see out there if you're doing this type of project. They talked about making sure compaction is completed before the mat cools to 185. You can go to Harbor Freight or somewhere and get yourself a infrared gun and check that when you're out there. And here you can see the rollers pretty tight to it. I did have to question, though, I don't see any leaves on the trees in this picture. So hopefully that was a warm fall day and they got the mat compacted before it cooled down too much. Type C mix after compaction. Nice tight seam at the longitudinal joint. So that's, again, we're trying to show the people what to look for when they're out there. If you see anything you don't like, bring it to the attention of the people doing the work prior to it becoming a major problem.
Sam, we've got a question if you have a second.
We have a second.
They wondered if, have you noticed this approach retaining its asphalt content longer, staying black longer than super pave hot mix or warm mix?
Yes, I have. Now, if you talk to the asphalt contractors, I think you're going to be getting a different slant on that. And I'm going back a couple years. I actually did a presentation for the State Innovation Council, and that was one of the things I brought up. And I don't have an answer why, some of the asphalt producers, the hot mix, warm mix producers, were there, and they didn't totally agree with me, and some of them did agree with me. So I don't have an answer as to why, but yes, I have been seeing that, if that answers the person's question.
Yeah, just one other while we're on the topic, Christopher wondered, to avoid crack reflection, is crack sealing sufficient, or would you need to use a membrane?
Well, if it's a transverse crack, which I would consider a working crack, uh, crack sealing would be sufficient. If you're talking more of a spider cracking, I don't want to say fatigue cracking because that could be an indication of a base problem. But if you're seeing more cracks that you'd be putting crack sealing all over the place, then I would go to the membrane. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah,
If
and
not, go
and
ahead.
I'm not, and it's lost on me what MTV is. Fred asked, is it needed to utilize MTV, meaning stateswide?
If you're talking about a transfer vehicle, no. Not,
Okay.
I've never seen it done that way.
And I don't want to hold you up, but one more question that I think is a good one. I've heard that crack sealing should be done at least 1 year before laying asphalt. Does this sound correct to you?
Yes, it does. Good luck with that logistically. When I actually worked, and I did actually work at one time, I tried to adhere to that because I didn't want the crack sealing to move under any of these operations. I'd been out on jobs when I was doing quality assurance work where they crack sealed immediately and paved over it immediately. The hot asphalt softened up the crack sealing, and when the rollers hit it, the mat moved and cracked. So I think that's what they were getting at. So if you can do it at least a year ahead of time, when the cracks are at their widest, early fall, that's the best time to do it. Okay. All right, let's finish up with paving. This is standard asphalt paving. The specifications in Pennsylvania have been changed. We used to have separate specs for hot mix and warm mix. Now it's just called asphalt. One of the things we want the locals to get familiar with is the job mix formula. Material class 9.5, 12.5, whatever. ESL ranges for the heavy traffic, skid resistance level, asphalt binder grade, percent of recycled material. I like to know myself. They're allowed up to 15% reclaimed material in the paving. So those are the things I show them on a job mix formula. But the big thing is I want them to be familiar with that. So when they're out on the job, they can compare that to the ticket of the delivery of the material coming in. Now, tack coat, industry-wide, nationwide, has been identified as a problem with the pavements exhibiting premature distress. PennDOT changed the specifications for tack material. They're trying to get more asphalt residue on the road to glue everything together after the water evaporates out of the emulsion. And I put this up here going way back to the beginning, specifications and communication. I was recently out on a job where two things happened. The consultant used the wrong spec. He used the old tack coat spec, and he was too prescriptive. He told them he wanted it shot at the asphalt residue rate, which that's after the water goes out of it. So by shooting at that rate, when the water evaporates, they're not going to have enough residue left on the roadway to properly glue the new asphalt to the old pavement. Delivery tickets should match the job mix formula. You're going to want to make sure if you want 9.5, it is 9.5. If it's for a low ESL count, 0 to 0.3 million ESLs, that's what you want. I just ran into a job where that's what they spec'd. They delivered 0.3 to 3 million ESLs, and the contractor explained to me that that was for heavier truck traffic, therefore it was a stronger material, therefore it was a better material. And I said, yes, but they also take a little bit of the binder out of it. So it's going to age prematurely, or at least that's what the research says. And the bottom line is I ordered a wedding cake. I didn't order a fruit cake. Fruit cake will last longer and is stronger, but that's not what I ordered. I want what was the recipe off the job mix formula. So we're still debating that. Again, you can take the temperature. I had one municipal official say, well, I wouldn't know what temperature it should be if I took the temperature of the material. And I said, that's why we're providing you with the specs, with the charts. And I said, but think about it. If you're out on a paving job and you take the temperature of the material in the paver, somebody's going to call the plant up and say, hopefully that's the right temperature because they're checking it. A little bit reverse psychology on that. And if it's okay, it's okay. But if it's cooling down too quick, somebody will get back to the plant and have it corrected. Don't run the hopper dry. That'll cause segregation. And all the way back in the 70s, I was down in Louisiana. I can't remember the gentleman's name. It was actually, well, actually, I guess it was Illinois. We were testing Blawnox pavers. And the old gentleman who was the expert in asphalt paving told me that if you have a uniform head of material maintained, you've gone a long ways to achieving quality. So when you look at the paver, the mix should be at the midpoint of the auger in the paver. Again, this is something you can do. Check the temperature. We want it compacted before it reaches 175 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's something very simple you can do when you're out there on the job. You can see a little bit, you're not seeing a uniform mat where those two bullet points are, or those two diagrams are. We're thinking that the slat conveyor, there was something wrong with the slat conveyor and that caused segregation. You want to keep the paver moving as continuous as possible. That's why someone mentioned the transfer vehicle. On municipal jobs, hardly ever is there transfer vehicle because they're short jobs. They can supply enough trucks. On a PennDOT job, they would be using transfer vehicles.
Can I interrupt for a question here?
Yes, you can.
So there's a question that says, do you see overheated asphalt on a regular basis? I ask because most people often caution against too cold of asphalt, but rarely speak of asphalt that is delivered 350 Fahrenheit plus.
Yes, but not recently. When we switched to Super Pave, I guess that was back in the 90s, there was a concern that we weren't going to be able to get it compacted because the slight change in the aggregate. So in order to get it compacted before it hit 185, the plant at times would elevate the production temperature. And when it got out in the field, it was above the 300 or 320 degree upper limit. And yes, it was deteriorating. It was prematurely aging the asphalt. I often said back in those days, if I did a super paving job in July, a year later, it looked grayer than the hair on my head. I have not seen that lately, where the plants are doing a better job of keeping it below that temperature, and the contractors and or the inspectors are doing a better job making sure that the people know that we don't want that elevated temperature out there. And of course, with the warm mix, the production can be produced lower. If they choose, they don't have to go anywhere near that upper range if they're using warm mix. So.
Okay, thank you. Just a heads up, you got about 8
Okay,
minutes.
we'll finish up here real quick. I was asked, and the reason I asked that question about who's using density gauges, because, you know, someone said to me, well, we put inspectors out on the job so we don't have to go out and look ourselves. Well, if you got an inspector out there and he's not using a density gauge, how are you determining that you're getting the compaction? The only way I know is optimum rolling pattern or non-movement. So what you see here, and that's why I asked that question about the density gauge. I've been out on tech assists, and everybody is blaming everyone that was involved in it, and the inspector should have known it. Well, if he's not using a density gauge, it's pretty tough to tell unless you're doing one of the other criteria. Here they're setting up an optimum rolling pattern, making sure the roller operator knows how many passes to make from breakdown and intermediate, etc., to get the compaction. Properly passed utility, it's not high, it's not low. You won't get differential compaction in that area. Bad tack code job. We want uniform tack code. You see that, you want to stop them immediately and say, that isn't going to work. We're trying to glue the new asphalt to the old pavement. That's not what we want out there, especially since the industry has identified tack as one of the problems. One of the things we saw early on with warm mix was if they didn't heat the screed up, the material coming in at a slightly lower temperature, we were getting some stretch marks, poor matte texture due to not heating the screed prior to pulling off the joint. In this case, there might have been a problem with the screed extensions not being adjusted that you see over on the left-hand corner of that mat. Showed you some bad examples, some good examples. Good matte texture and compaction after pulling off the transverse joint. Difficult area to do in that intersection. Here you can see the gentleman in the middle checking the depth of the paving mat to make sure we're getting the depth that we bid. Proper operation of roller, that's how you want the roller man to stop so he's not leaving creases out there. Specs call for a hand tamper of inaccessible areas. I'm not quite sure how much good that hand tamper is doing. I would rather see a vibratory plate or something out there, but at least he's trying to do something out there. Specs also call for bituminous material applied to the longitudinal joint so you can glue the next lane, the abutting lane. That's one of the things on the just municipal jobs that is lacking. Here's some temperature related checking during rolling. The top of the mat was hot. The roller hit it internally in that mat. The top of the mat was cooler. Internally inside that mat, it was still warm, and the mat started to move on them, and you got that check cracking. Here's an example. I don't know how well you can see that. This is typical example of segregation of the asphalt. In the forefront, you can see where it's developing into a pothole. And at the top of the screen, you can see some more up near the white line. And segregation is very difficult to stop. You're going to have to come out there and keep the air and water from getting in there, or you're going to have poths all through your new mat. That could be attributed to something that's segregated in the truck on the way out. Truckload segregation, be my educated guess. The first area was the first material out. The far area up at the top of the screen, the last material out of the truck. Saw that early on with Super Pave. They've changed the way the trucks are to be loaded. 3 drops, and that's not happening as much as it had in the past. I look at this and I ask the participants, what is wrong with this mat? And due to time restraints, I'll answer it for you. Nothing. That's what you want to see out there. If you don't see that, start asking questions. Summarize quickly, you can see everything I've highlighted, and I'm going to say you need to open that line of communication from the beginning of the bid project to the planning of it, to the bid documents, to the execution of it. One thing I didn't talk about was the ADA requirements. We talk about that in the 4-hour course. Obviously, if you need to meet those regulations, you have to review the specifications again so everybody's on the same page. Get out of the office, go out there. You see something, don't hesitate. Those are 3 elected supervisors off to the left. If you see something you don't like or you don't think's right, ask the question. You know, if you have a job that goes bad, who's responsible? Well, in my opinion, everybody. The people that live along that road are going to think you are if you own it. You took their tax money and you didn't get a quality job. The contractor doesn't want bad publicity, and the inspector doesn't want bad publicity. So make an effort. If you go out and make the effort, you can turn a great job as a finished project instead of a mediocre job. Make the effort and communicate. With that, I think I finished up maybe 1 or 2 minutes ahead of time. So if there are any further questions, I'll entertain them now.
Yeah, Sam, I want to take you
Sam.
back. There was one question that went back to the ultra thin versus microsurfacing. And Christopher asked, what is the estimated performance of one relative to the other with those?
Well, what I've seen is the micro, let me go back one more to a typical seal coat. I like to see 5 years out of a typical oil and chip seal coat. Micro, anywhere from 7 to 9. What I'm seeing in a good quality ultra thin bonded wearing course or Nova chip, anywhere from 9 to 11. Now, keep in mind the cost of those projects increases from the seal coat to the micro. When you seal coat and micro cost wise aren't very much apart in Pennsylvania anyway. When you jump from micro to the ultra thin bonded wearing course, you are paying more for it, but I am seeing a lot longer life expectancy before you have to go out and do any preventive maintenance to it. Any other questions?
That's all we had, other than some kudos in the comment section. So, but we're right at time. So you did a great job on time. Appreciate that. And Sam, we want to thank you for all the great content this morning. And again, the presentation is available for download. And if you've got any questions, you can always hit Sam up with a question. Thanks so much, everybody, for today.
Thanks.
Yes, and thank you. And I just want to thank Sam as well, and remind everybody that tomorrow's conference, there is no opening session, but you can join us at 7:45 to get into the classrooms. The two presentations start at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning. One is quality construction practices of microsurfacing and chip seal, and the other session is planning for walking, biking, and mass transit. So reminder that all of the presentations for tomorrow are available to download in your pull down in your Talent LMS platform. You should see them there as PDFs, the slide decks. And if anyone is curious about professional hours for this conference, there'll be a comments on that tomorrow morning on how to access that. So without further ado, we thank you for joining us today, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks for having me, folks. Have a good day.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Matt.